conversations that I've had so far, some people are very conscious about it. Other people, it seems to just be hardwired into who they are. It's interesting, just also color commentary. I've come to learn that, to my complete shock and surprise, you consider yourself an introvert, which I never would have thought, at least in the first 10 years of knowing
That,
you.
yeah, and I don't think I was back then. I think
So
I've
maybe
gotten
that's
older.
changed.
Yeah,
So I'm curious, and I think a lot of coaches are, interestingly, at least
yeah,
coaches in our universe tend to
yeah.
be a little bit more on the cerebral side, a little, not all of them, but anyways. Uh, how do you think about networking or community? Is it something you do inherently? Obviously, you've also talked about, you planted a church. That's a huge part of your life.
Sure.
Family's huge part, but is it something that you sit down and think about consciously, or is it just hardwired into who you are? Is it a business strategy? Maybe you could just
Yep.
kind of tell people how you think about network and community.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple layers here. So one, if I can be so, if I could advertise my podcast, the Build Your Business podcast with Chris,
Mhm.
the one that came out today, as we're recording this today, which is March 28th, the one that came out today is how to hire your first employee, and it's about this very thing. Now, here's my opinion on it, and Chris and I are absolutely in tune with this. And by the way, my little brother is significantly um, more successful than I am. I hire people I know, and that has worked at a very high percent. We have a very low turnover rate in our business and always have. Now, when there's turnover, it's just like the partnership talk. There are people that don't work here anymore that we're still very good friends with, but there's some that we're not.
Yeah.
However, in those thinking moments, what you're doing as a owner is you're a problem solver. And so you're identifying, like, where are my problem, what are the problems I'm running into? And where are the bottlenecks? And what are the things that are slowing the business down? What are the things that I'm doing that I'm not very good at? What are the things I'm doing that I hate? Right? All of those sorts of things. And then as soon as you identify for me, as soon as I identify the problem, a name immediately starts popping in my head. Oh, you know who'd be
Mhm.
awesome with that? And that's because it comes back to that trust equation, because I have a relationship with that person and I trust them and they have the skill set. So they're the right personality and the right skill set for that job. So step one, I'm talking really about staff or hiring or employees, but I'll also talk about this with clients. I hired Nikki Sims, was my first employee that I hired. And I am I think I'm a very good customer service person. But as the business grew, I was getting lots of customer service emails, and I was we had our coaches, but I was still doing all of the administrative, customer service work. And 1 in 25 emails, I would say, I don't know, maybe that's exaggerate. Maybe Nikki would say 1 in 10. I think 1 in 25 would
I
just
remember
piss me
hearing about
off,
these
something
emails.
awful, and I would just absolutely. And
Yeah.
I can let somebody have it on an email where I'm not, I'm not cussing at them and saying like go F yourself or anything. I was like, it was a way to belittle somebody
Mm.
in a way that was like, but they couldn't ever point to any sentence that was like, this guy's mad and he told me to F off. I was just like explaining how ridiculous
Mm.
this issue was, right?
Mm.
And at the time, I had started to talk to Nikki about, like, I think I need some help with customer service. And Nikki was great with people, and she's a great communicator, especially at the time, like over email, which is the primary mode of communication we were using. And so I can remember her sending me the email and saying, I'll go ahead and take over all those. because
Mm.
because if the vision for the company is to be the best customer service company in the world, then 1 in 25 emails coming out from the owner can't be one that belittles a client, right? And so I think about the problems that I have, the things that I hate. Payroll was another one. I was doing payroll. I was fine at payroll. I just hated it. And so Nikki stepped in. We figured out a third party at the time to hire, and that's been off my plate from that day because I couldn't stand it. And so those are the ways I think about when as I'm hiring. I'm trying to hire people in my network that I know, that I trust, that I know they have the skill set and the personality to do this thing, that they'll take initiative, which is another big core value, and that they're good where I'm not, right? Now, what's the risk? If it doesn't work out, You might have just lost a friend. That's the risk. But I've also now, as the business has grown, done this thing where we don't know anybody that has the skill set. So when it came time to hire like a VP of
Right.
finance, we didn't know anybody that was at least in our budget that also had
Right.
the skill set. So we had to do the get all the resumes. I mean, I think we got literally non-Reynolds exaggeration. I like
Yeah.
250 resumes. Work through those. Do the interviews. It sucked. It worked out. I mean, there's a good way to do that, but I think using your network to hire, especially in the beginning, people that you know are not just going to be yes men, that are not just going to tell you yes all the time, but that are good where you're not, is incredibly important. And then to be able to understand that there's a compartmentalization that occurs in that network if you're working in the same business. That for me, and not everyone is like this. As a matter of fact, most people are not. That as the owner, CEO, I hate the term boss, but people that look at me as a boss, if I have to get somebody in trouble or talk to them or, whatever, something that is sort of a negative thing in the business that we have to talk about. There are people that internalize that and they're like, "Oh, Matt doesn't like me as a friend anymore." Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No,
Mm,
let's go have dinner tonight. Like, we're fine. But
mm-hmm.
that's not like the business is the business and the friendship is the friendship. Now I can compartmentalize that, but I also have to know who's on my team who can't. So I use the
Mm-hmm.
network one to hire the team in the places where I'm not good, people that have skill sets that I don't have. That's how you build the Avengers, as you said.
How do
I
you think about the building or cultivating the network? I mean, again, maybe I'm getting it too engineering, but I think some people I find in conversations, there's a couple areas where coaches struggle. I think one of them, like you've already touched on, is thinking of themselves as a business owner or confronting some of the problem solving that a business owner has to take responsibility over. Sales is another one, and then networking to varying degrees, especially as online coaches. I don't know if it's a generational shift, but it's sort of networking has this dirty word kind of
Sure.
associated with it. Do you have a way of approaching it that makes it feel more natural, or again, like maybe you're just hardwired to do it, or do you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone to do it? I mean, I think
I,
about one that comes to mind that you kind of joke about sometimes, but Influential actually has had a pretty big impact.
sure. Yeah.
There's connections that we still have to this day that came from that. And, Ryan McGinn is blown up and you met him and we talked to him personally
Sure.
as a connection you made there. So I mentioned that one because that one felt maybe the most outside your comfort zone where you weren't just in your kind of bubble of interests. You stepped
Yep.
outside to go meet people and make connections. So I'm curious for coaches that are listening, if you have any like wisdom about how to think about that aspect of building and cultivating that
Yeah.
network.
That's another great question and one that has also never been asked of me. So, um, I generally cannot stand inorganic networking events. I hate them. And I will almost never go to them. I went to Influential because they asked me to speak. And so I'm
Mm,
there. But it's shoving all these guys that are influencers online in different industries and in fitness and style and whatever the stuff is. And you're all together. And what you end up doing is organically you connect with some people and so when I think of networking in the dirty word sort of way, I think of like in the late 80s when it was like, hey, let's all get in a room
mm.
and share business
I was
cards. I'm
gonna
like, that's
say,
not networking. That's
the
not.
scene from what's the movie? The famous scene where they're all sharing their business cards.
Oh, and American Psycho,
Yes,
American
yeah,
Psycho
yeah.
with
Thank
Christian
you,
Bale. Yeah,
Christian
yeah.
Bale.
It's like bone white and
What
their
does
font
Paul
and all this.
have?
Yeah, it's
Show me yours,
so
Paul.
ridiculous. So so for me, and one of an event like that where I am in a room. This is a great example of what I mean when I say I don't necessarily feel like an extrovert anymore, and I feel more and more as I get older and closer to 50, more like an introvert. Or like the Arnold. We just did the Arnold
Mm,
Classic, right? So there's 150,000 people that come through there. We're looking for the needle in the haystack. We're looking for coaches. We're there for turnkey coach, not for Barbell Logic. And you just have to be on the whole time you're there. But it's not authentic. It's not
mm,
organic. And so while it is valuable that their real value has occurred from the Arnold for sure, I don't like it very much. I'll
Mm,
be honest. Now,
mm-hmm,
here's what I like. Um, one of our biggest clients at Turnkey Coach is Anthony Deal.
mm-hmm.
I already knew him. We were already friends. We had talked. I already had built some trust with him, and he had built some trust with me. So then when it came time to talk to him about, hey, what are you using for online coaching? And it's this third party software. I'm like, dude, you got to try our software. And so you're not trying to build something out of nothing. I think you can. I think there's value in cold calling, cold emailing, some of those things. But I think far more valuable, what I would consider the network low hanging fruit, is you take the people that are in your life, and I'm specifically talking about sales, that would make a great client, or that you already know them and they have already built trust with you. And they also, bonus, if they're also great at networking, they know lots of other people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, which
And so
Anthony
then you get to
was
have these
extremely good
conversations.
with.
Yeah, you get to have these conversations with Anthony Deal and John Flagg and Gaglione and whoever, right? And so, I got to go be on Dave Tate's podcast, and Dave had come on my podcast, and I'd trained at Westside several times. And so while we didn't know each other super well, we knew each other organically because we had done each other's podcasts. I had trained at the gym with him, those sorts of things. And now he's been an incredible asset to us. And he still he texts me on Christmas,
Wow.
and like personally, not in a group text. And so things like that.
Mm,
That's how I use the network. And so what you're doing is you're using the low hanging fruit of the network is you get everybody that fit the target demographic of your client, or know all the target demographic of your client, right? So, my daughter is a cosmetologist. They see people and talk to people all day, every day. They
mm,
know people right now. So if your target demographic is the type of often female, and depending on the age group in that specific salon, like I would make real good friends with those cosmetologists because that's an incredible connector piece.
mm,
And I wouldn't do it from an inorganic standpoint. I would just start to think about who are the people in my life that I know and trust, and they know lots of people, and I like them, and their personality is great, and their core values are similar, and that's when it comes natural. So that you start there, and then you from that point, it is so much easier to get a warm lead. It's so much easier to close eventually a warm lead from one of those, from an Anthony Deal or John Flagg or somebody that we know, or one of our coaches at Block, than sending out the cold email or trying to tell somebody who you are from the very beginning. I still do it all the time because I don't know how not to. But when I have to do those events like the Arnold, like Influential, and you've got to be on all the time, I want to go back to the Airbnb and like curl up in the fetal position and like suck my thumb for a few
watch
hours
Hamilton.
and just yeah, right. And just yeah, so actually like two nights ago, I watched The Big Short for about
Yeah,
the
that's
30th time.
mm-hmm,
Um because I had work to do, and it was like 7:30 at night, and I typically am not working at 7:30 at night. There's just lots of work right now. So I couldn't really watch something on TV. So I'm breaking
mm-hmm,
my rule of the distraction, but I had been
mm-hmm,
working since 2:40 a.m. And so I'm like, it's 7:30 at night. I'm like, all right, I'm going to turn on a movie. I love this movie. It's cathartic to me. I don't know what I love the housing market crisis. It's interesting and fun. And I could work. Now my work was slower, but I still was able to do a thing that allowed me to decompress a little bit so that I didn't go right from work to bed and then try to
mm,
turn my brain off.
right.
And what actually happened was I fell asleep in my chair, and my daughter came in at 8:30 and took video of me and laughed hysterically because the laptop was still open in my rocking chair and The Big Short's playing in the background, and she's like, your head wasn't resting on the headrest and it
It's
wasn't
still
tilted
propped up.
forward. She said it was like literally like you were working on, and my fingers were still like on the keyboard of the laptop,
Wow.
and just your eyes were closed. And I had slept that way for like an hour. Yeah, because
This
I
flashes me back
my
to
sleep app had
like
tracked it.
the classic dad finger still on the remote watching
Yeah,
the football game,
yeah,
but
right,
he's just out
exactly.
cold.
That's right.
I got so we're about out of time, I think. If you got
Yeah.
5 more minutes. I got
Yes,
one
I
other
do.
question I want to get to. I'll be curious to see where this goes, but um, what's been interesting to me, this is like one of your superpowers that I had the maybe the hardest time relating to is your certainty. Some might even call it, I might even at times describe it as faith in the face of the most uncertainty.
Mm,
And there's been so many moments throughout the course of the business that I can think back to where when you were actually most clear is when it seemed like there was the most risk.
that's right.
And that was when you were the most decisive and the most motivated and uh, would execute kind of most vigorously.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think how to ask the best question, but like, how do, and I mean, this goes all the way back to where I started in that I believe there are things that I don't even know are happening in the business that you are handling as the founder and the owner. And as you're talking to coaches out there that are thinking about taking what are probably feels like big risks or have to take big risks where there's an unknown on the other side, or cases where I think you said at the beginning, you had 6 months of runway. We would call it
Sure.
runway now. You talked about having like you could afford to live to pay the bills for 6 months.
Sure.
But that's basically a constant thing, which it's funny. I also brought this up in a conversation with Chris a week or two ago. And I was talking about how we have, whatever our runway was for the product. And he laughed at me. And he's like, do you know how ridiculously good it is that you have that much runway? And I was
Right.
just sort of like, caught me off guard because, I kind of operate in this, sometimes la la land of not thinking about that. And, just the idea of having any amount of runway, especially from somebody like myself coming back from kind of a traditional paycheck job,
Sure.
which probably still has a runway. It's just that like that
Yeah.
employer employee relationship, you somehow pretend like there's not. Like you just
Yep.
assume you're going to have this paycheck forever, even though you could be fired tomorrow.
That's exactly right.
But you
Yep.
live in this fantasy land of this is an infinite runway scenario. So I guess really what I'm coming back to is how do you think about runway and risk and and uncertainty and
Yep.
not go crazy or not completely derail that just like emotionally seems like a big challenge as a founder and
Sure.
a
It
CEO.
it definitely is. I would start with, even if you are a business of one and you're a coach and you're still struggling to make that paradigm shift of I'm a founder slash business owner, you're thinking of yourself as a coach. You may not think you have a boss, but if that's all you do, then your job is your boss. You you don't own a job owns you, right? This is from E-Myth, and you've heard Dave Ramsey say it and people like that. And so in order to grow a business, and I don't think everybody, not only do I not think everybody's cut out to grow I think a very small percentage of people are actually cut out to own a business.
Mm,
From there, you you your personality will determine, am I okay with a business that puts $100,000 a year in my pocket? And if you are, that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. What is okay about that is that you'll probably experience wildly less risk and pressure than the kind of stuff that I'm going through, or the type of stuff that my brother's going through, or think about the type of stuff that Zuckerberg or Bezos or Elon or whatever.
mm,
Think of that pressure. Like I actually think about that level of pressure, getting called into Congress.
mm,
Like you talk about crisis mode, or turning points or milestones, or where you really better be sharp, where Bill Gates failed when he got called in and when they broke up Microsoft, back in
mm,
the 90s, right? Because he broke under the pressure, right? For me, I noticed very early, from sports. I always played in the game better than I practiced, and I practiced really hard. I
mm.
performed better.
Interesting.
I enjoyed performing at as a professional strongman, right? I can remember getting my first job, my first real job. I worked in an architect firm because I thought I was going to be an architect. I was like 18 years old, fresh out of high school. And I had a high pressure task that was given to me that had to basically be done at the end of the day. It was the best day I ever had there.
Mm,
And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, this jazzes me up, man.
mm,
Risk is awesome. And there are places where risk is not, right? Like I don't ever sports gamble. And I'm not saying if you do, you're doing anything immoral, but the reality is that I'm drawn to pressure and risk. Now it's calculated risk when we swing for the fences, But I don't want to walk down that path is too dangerous for
And in
a guy
contrast,
like
you
me.
were really into poker for a while
I was before I was a
because
business owner.
you were
Yep.
making, those are calculated bets, basically. You
That's
had like
exactly right.
almost
That's
like a
exactly
math
right.
equation
Yeah,
going on in your head.
it's pot odds. So you're looking
Yeah.
at you're counting the money, that's on the table, and you know what is in your hand, and you have a pretty good idea what they have. You don't know exactly what they have, and you're
Right.
calculating whether you should call the bet or raise the bet or whatever. It's just math. It's just logic. So coming back to your question. So one, I know that I thrive under pressure. And I actually have a list on my phone that I'm not going to read because most of them are too personal, but they're called business turning points, like major milestones in our business. You know most of them, and some people know some of them, but those are the times that I look back and say, like, not only was this a major turning point in the business, it was a major turning point in my life. And so those sometimes occur, they often occur out of deep crisis mode. There is a deep crisis, and we have got to fix the problem. And there is no other option but to succeed. And this is where I'm a big fan of guess how many businesses I own? One,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
one. So that if this one fails, I lose my house, right? So this is why I don't like it when especially younger, earlier business owners try to diversify their revenue streams by having multiple businesses. No, no, no. Do the one business you have really, really well. Once you do, diversify the revenue stream in that business. It's like us going from B2C to a SaaS company. Like that, okay, well, we've done really well in the B2C. We didn't open up a new SaaS company. Like it might
Right.
look that way to the outside world, but it's actually all part of the same business, the same admin team, like those sorts of things. And when you get those opportunities, whether that is crisis mode or whether that is just like, whoa, this is a big opportunity, that's when we swing for the fences. That's
Mm.
when we sit down for a little bit and think about it. And we say, okay, like if it's crisis mode, like we've had times where it's like, I don't know if we got to make payroll in a week. There's not enough money in the bank to make payroll. What are you going to do? Not make payroll? Or are you going to figure it out? You better figure it out. And so, yes, that is something that I thrive on, and I think I get laser focused. I will say that when you are doing that and are in those crisis modes or handling that risk, and it's a big thing, all the other stuff gets pushed to the side. To be honest, like I'm not a great
Mm.
dad during those times. I'm
Mm.
not a great husband. I often don't train. My nutrition's not great. Like in a perfect world, all those things would be great, and I'd be able to turn it off. Severance, like I'd be severed. I'd forget that this job exists, and I would just be dad and husband and stuff. But for the most part, I'm like I wake up in the morning, and I have done this whole for the last like month or so at like 2:45, like real
Mm.
early. This morning, I think it was 2:19, and I wake up and I'm excited to solve the problem.
Mm.
And I think that's where Chris and I are, and that's a personality thing. I don't wake up freaking out like the sky is falling because it's just not an option. This is it. Like, this is the job. And it's not just the job for me, it's the job for all of these other amazing people who are supported by this company and now Turnkey Coach who are leveraging the software and they're running their business that way. You can't let something fail.
Mm.
And so yes, sometimes there's risk. You don't want to swing for the fences when the risk is so high and the ROI, the potential ROI is low. You
Mm.
swing for the fences when you make the calculated pot odds, just like poker, and you're like, okay, we're going to take the risk because the potential return on investment is absolutely worth it. And
Mm.
so sometimes you swing for the fences and you strike out and you like, oof, and you get a gut punch and you're like, okay, but we're not going to shut the business down. And sometimes you hit the home run.
Have you heard there's again like a startup quote I heard somewhere, but when you're making those decisions, assume it's going to take twice as long, cost twice as much, be twice as hard. And if you still want to do it, then swing for the fit. Do you have any kind of like
Yeah,
rules of thumb
I've
for
heard that
that?
quote many, many times. I have never considered that one
Never
time
done.
when I'm making a decision.
It's like it's more binary. Like, is this right in alignment with my values
It's
and
exactly
opportunity?
binary.
Yeah,
It's exactly what it
interesting.
is. It's a yes or no. Now that
Yeah.
I don't like, I can make a pretty, and I think good founders should be able to do this. You should be able to make a pretty good decision and often the right decision quickly. but you do need to spend some time. You're not firing it from the hip. This
Hmm.
comes back to the thinking. So like, okay, we got a big decision to make. We got a big partnership we're going into. We're going to propose a big contract to the military, like whatever the thing is. I need to sit down for 15 or 20 minutes of like legit, no distraction. My brain's working and can think and go, yep, we're going to go this way.
There's a one kind of thing I would like to end on that. There's like this crystal clear moment in my mind, though, that is in complete contrast to that. And you had zero thought. In fact, I think you said you responded before I even finished the sentence. But I asked you at one point, this was probably around 2021, where we were right about to make the plunge into turnkey coach and kind of really go after that. And I
Yep.
think the question was, it was something to the effect of, what if this doesn't work out? And your response was, oh, that's not an option.
Yep.
It was just
Never.
like,
That's never an option.
you're like, of course it will, because it can't not work. And that's just like one of those, again, engineering brain was just like, awesome.
And to be
But you
clear,
saying that as
deep
a
in my
leader,
soul, I believe that with all
yeah,
my
that's the
heart,
thing.
dude.
It did not feel like Reynolds exaggeration. It didn't feel
Right.
like you were just trying to like puff it up, or it didn't feel like a rah cheesy moment. It was just like so matter of fact.
Yep.
And it was really interesting. I mean, from as a leadership thing, hearing that, I'd totally relaxed after that. I was just like, okay, I don't have to worry about that aspect. I just need to execute. Because it's interesting in contrast, also just personality wise, I was the opposite when it came to practice and performance. I would crush in practice, and I almost hated the performance.
Yep. Yep.
Like
I think a
I,
lot of people are that way.
I had two, in my rowing days, we would do effectively seat races on every single piece. And we would line up from fastest to slowest, regardless of whether it was a 20-minute, a 40-minute, a 2K, a 1K. In practice, I would sit number 3. The two guys in front of me went on to become a gold medalist and a bronze medalist Olympian in
Yeah.
the US Olympic 8. And I was there every single day. But when it came down to like race day and pieces, I was 10 or 15, maybe even 20. Like all these guys who were just, do their thing during practice would show up on game day and crush. I still made it into the varsity boat because of some other aspects of it. I think in some ways my coach respected the practice, and I would show up on seat racing day. But again, that was almost arguably practice.
Sure.
So I would earn my seat, but it's just interesting how that personality piece is a different component, or an angle, or a mindset that you bring to the team and as a leader that I don't know. I'll be curious to hear what people think about that, because I think there's probably like two camps of people that might be listening to this. One, that's really inspiring and motivating, and two, maybe I'm not a founder, maybe I'm not an owner, like,
Yeah, and
but
that's okay.
maybe that's okay. Like
That's right.
maybe that means that person should go try to find somebody with the qualities that you just described.
Yep. Exactly
Um,
right.
and
Because not
that's a
everybody's
business
wired to be
partner,
that.
right?
Yep.
Like maybe
That's
that's a
exactly
way to
right.
find a good business partner, is somebody, not just the idea. And this is another important thing. You're not just the cheerleader idea guy that dumps everything on everybody else.
Sure.
You're still in the trenches working a ton, but you also have that gear that provides kind of air cover and direction to the team in the most critical moments.
Yep.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And to be clear, there are some really hard weeks and some really hard months, and there's times when there are, as the business grows, there are multiple crises or major milestone or potential turning points that you're dealing with, and so I left in-person coaching because I was stuck to a schedule and a location, and I worked too many hours, and then now I'm the CEO of this big company, and I work way too many hours anyway, but I still get to do it from wherever I want to.
Yeah.
And it's not all the time. And then here's the thing. Here's why that matters is that it is imperative that you cannot stay in crisis mode, in major problem solving milestone mode all the time. That is unsustainable. And so it's also why I will often put in, I don't want to exaggerate. Let's say 100-hour weeks. That's for sure. And I think significantly more sometimes, but I might work 100 hours in a week. But I can't do that 52 weeks a year.
Right.
And so there are times then that you have to go, okay, we've solved the crisis or solved the problem or swung for the fences or did the thing and business as usual. And you've got to be able to let that fatigue and the cortisol buildup and all the stuff that occurs, because that's what it is. I mean, it's just like, imagine if an NFL player played in the Super Bowl every single day for 3 months. Like, how much would that burn you out? I think about this is probably why a lot of like rock stars, artists. You think about Taylor Swift, who just did this like giant tour every night, had to perform whatever it is, 3 hours, right? And I'm not even saying I couldn't name more than one or two songs of Taylor Swift, but like being on all the time, like putting on the face, being like that is unsustainable.
Mm.
And so some of these guys they tour for a year, and that's why I think a lot of them end up in not great places, and
Mm.
then others get done with the tour and don't go on tour again for another several years because they've got
Right,
to
right.
decompress. There has to be some decompression time after the big crisis. But if you're one of those people and you're listening to this and you get to the crisis and your first inclination is to procrastinate and crawl in bed, this ain't for you.
Mm.
Your first inclination should be, I get to solve this problem today.
Mm.
Not I have to, I get to solve the problem. We have a problem that we get to solve, and it's a big one. So, how are we going to best solve it? And failure is not an option.
Any questions for Mr. Reynolds?
Oh, that was great. That was yeah, the last thing you said there in that interview when it was when the crisis hits, either you get to solve this problem or you don't, and that's the business. I haven't had one of those yet. I don't I there's not been a point where I've thought, right, if I don't solve this problem, everything's
Yeah,
gonna go away. But I hope that I have the ability to recognize when that moment comes and meet it with the correct attitude, and which is daunting. But I think after hearing that, I think it'll be good. Like when did you realize that was something that was the way you thought about things?
that's a good question. There's just like I said, I talked about this on the recording. Is just I love high pressure performance. I like it. I loved taking the ACT and the SAT in high school because I wanted to prove that I was smart enough, good enough to perform well in college. And so, where a lot of people have all this test anxiety, I don't have that. And so that doesn't mean that I don't have times where I don't have to sit for a while very silently and kind of think through how to solve the problem. But it's just not innate in me to have a problem that I don't want to deal with. And so, I mean, it still happens sometimes. It's relatively rare in the business. I mean, sometimes it's personal stuff like, we're like we had an issue of like my daughter and her boyfriend kept coming up on vacation over the last 2 weeks in Mexico, and he's a really good kid, but there's just the typical sort of she's 20 years old, and as a dad, you're always like, is there anybody good enough for my daughter? And that stuff kept coming up in our Rachel and I had great conversations. We were celebrating our 25th anniversary, so happy anniversary to my wife. Um, and at some point, I was just like, you know what? Let's just not talk about that on this vacation. And so that's still kind of that thing where it was like, okay, I don't need to solve this problem. And also, sometimes those problems are really kind of out of your control. And so there's also times when you can really stress or be anxious over a problem that you can't really affect the outcome very well. And so then in the business, having times like when I really kind of got forced out of my gym in 2015, I wasn't depressed and I wasn't like, it was just like I wasn't so lost. I didn't know what to do. It was like, okay, I've got to now I have an opportunity to figure out what to do next. And so that was probably the first major business crisis that I can remember thinking, all right, like I've got to pull together, and I wrote a business plan, and I started that for an in-person. I think I talked about it in the first half of the interview from a couple weeks ago, but it was just like, well, if I'm going to do this, like it's time to get to work right now. And then when it became online coaching, it was like, oh, online coaching is actually the direction I'm going to go. It was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and actually write all the systems and SOPs and figure the system out, how to scale it, those sort of things. And then since then, I coached you for years. You know a lot of this story. Like I was sued by my mentor. And there was never a time when I thought we're going to shut this thing down. It was like we've got to solve this problem. And I've raised money with investors, and the highest pressure version of that was the Series A. And they just throw you out to the wolves. You're in a room with 75 investors, and you're pitching your company, and it's terrifying. But you think to yourself, like, if we're going to grow and grow fast and do what we need to do, like, we've got to raise the Series A. And then putting a board together and having a board of directors is scary, but it's a thing that we've done. And so all of those things for me, you talk about not having to face the kind of do or die moment yet in the business. And certainly you don't want to wish for that soon. That will come at some point. It just is. It just is part of every business owner has those stories. But in the aftermath or even in the midst of it, you go into problem solving mode, not into freak out crisis mode, not into depression mode, not into I'm gonna go crawl in bed and like not deal with this right now because it's too much to think about, or self-medicate with alcohol or whatever the thing is. Like there's all these opportunities to do things that are not healthy. And so you solve the problem as best you can. You galvanize the team. I think that's part of what a good leader is able to do. And our team galvanized very well around some of those hardships. And in the aftermath, I look back and I go, I'm actually really glad I've been through a lawsuit. I'm really glad that I've had to raise money. I'm really glad I have investors. I'm really glad I have grateful that I have a board of directors. And so, because those were all things that I didn't have experience with as a business owner in the past. And so whatever that is, and for a lot of people listening, that might be hiring your first employee or firing your first, as the first time you have to fire somebody. As a matter of fact, Chris and I are going to record for next week on how to fire your first employee. That'll come out next Friday. And, those things are difficult. But then once you get through them, you're like, okay, there's a lesson learned there. Whether you did it well or did it not well, I try to be very self-aware and like, okay, what if like on the rare occasion, and it's rare that I have to fire somebody, but it will have to happen as an owner. The first question I ask myself, which is very authentic, and I really think this way, and I might not even communicate. Let's say an employee, and I'm not saying an employee's done this, and I'm certainly not thinking of anybody in particular, but let's say an employee does something like truly heinous and it hurts your company. And it's really their fault that this thing happened. I still have to think to myself, like, what? I own the business. Why did I hire a person that would do a heinous thing that would hurt the business? How did I put myself and this person in position to do that, to do something that's so untrustworthy? And that's a me problem as an owner. And so, but there's a lesson to be learned there. And, the first time you start struggling with, okay, cash flow, and I've got to make payroll. Like that's a real problem that I talked about. It's like, what are you going to do? Not make payroll? You got to figure it out. And so having all those things over the course of 20 years of business ownership taught me all these lessons. And then those problems, which feel like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, might have been a major problem, might have been something that really put me into a tailspin, doesn't anymore. And so it really takes something insane to be able to put me in maybe personally and privately crisis mode, but then publicly it's still problem solving mode. And that's, I think, what a good leader is. Like, I'm never going to go to my team and go like, ship's going down and we're all, it's over. And, but I also never think that's really going to happen. And so, like I mentioned, like I talked to Andrew, it's just, I have maybe and I think good entrepreneurs are this way. And that doesn't mean I'm saying I'm a great entrepreneur, a good entrepreneur, but they have almost an unnatural optimism or a naive optimism in their business to say like, this is going to work. And I know that it's going to be hard. And I know there's going to be problems that literally put the business on the brink of disaster. My job is to solve the problem and make sure that it doesn't turn into that. And that we take this and we learn from it and make sure that that doesn't happen again. And so from those early days on, when you're doing hard things like delegating payroll or hiring employees or firing employees, all the way up to lawsuits and board of directors and raising money and things like that. Those are all just learning lessons for business owners. And, I mentioned that I don't think I could handle, getting called in front of Congress and Congress is trying to tell me I'm a monopoly like they have for Microsoft or Apple or Google or whatever. And so that's pressure. And I would hope that I would rise to the occasion at that point. And I would also hope, like, obviously they're not going to call a company in of my size to think that we're a monopoly. And I'm sure that, no matter what you think of these founders, of people like, Zuckerberg or Larry Page or Bill Gates or whatever, it took a long time for them to get there. So they had to solve lots of other hard problems that weren't quite that hard by the time they got to the point where they were being questioned by Congress for a monopoly. Like, that's a big, huge deal. And so that's what it is. I mean, you just take it kind of one day at a time, and then you take the problems as they come. And as the business is small, the problems are actually not that big. They feel big, and you solve them. And then the next time you come up with a problem like that, you're more prepared to solve that problem. But then another bigger problem is around the corner. And so that's business ownership in a nutshell, is that we are constantly problem solving, leading well. I think our job in problem solving, when you have a staff, is really two-headed to be successful. It's can you motivate the staff to be on board with the mission and vision of the company, the direction that you're going? That's number one and incredibly important. Do they believe in the core values of the business? That's huge. And then number two, it's your job as the owner or even a manager who has people that you're managing, is to train them in skill acquisition to be able to improve their ability to do their job well. You can't just, this is where I think a lot of people miss the bridge of writing the SOP, and then they hand them the SOP and they go do the SOP. Well, there was no training there. Like, that's okay. That's a good first step, but then you have to train through the SOP. And so it's motivation and skill acquisition. And when you do both of those things, that motivation being really centrally focused around those core values and a shared mission and vision and goal, when your staff is really focused on those things, then they are much more open to learn the skill acquisition. Life is changing like crazy right now. AI is like changing things on a daily basis. And if you have a staff that's unmotivated and doesn't really understand where you're going, they're not going to pick up the ball and take it down the field. And so motivation first, skill acquisition second, but both must always be done.
All right. I think we are about out of time for the day. Appreciate James showing up once again. Looking forward to seeing next week. We're going to be doing the interview series going forward are all going to be live. So
be fun.
Should be hopefully technically not too challenging, but looking forward to the next round of interviews that we got coming up.
I'm looking forward to setting up another trip out to Scotland to visit James and my friends out in Scotland. It's my favorite country in the world outside of the one I live in. And about time for me. I want to take Wade. I want to take our chairman of the board to Scotland and do a trip there. So beautiful place. Thanks for being on the call, sir, especially late at night. Thanks for having me, Andrew. As always, it's a big honor. So
my pleasure.